Is bigger indeed better? And does size matter?
Like, oh, we're all on this $300 million project, but actually finds out they're spending the next 6 months putting doors on.
Complexity and challenge is not just found in the tier one space, but it's an itch that I have to go and scratch.
Yeah, Lauren, I absolutely love my job.
You know, there's maybe that honeymoon period where they feel like, I just got all this stuff done.
He said to me, look, there's just less BS here.
One isn't better than the other, it's different.
Yep.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Phil and Lauren podcast. Today's important question, Lauren. Is bigger indeed better? And does size matter? Does it really matter when it comes to building sites, construction companies and project size?
Thank you for the clarification. I was concerned I'd stepped into the wrong podcast for just a moment. Well, I guess that all depends.
Depends on the person, obviously.
Yeah.
But why are we bringing this question up today? Well, maybe I'll tell a quick story as to put it in the context of just something that just happened yesterday. Talking to a university student 2 years in, wanted to have some advice as to how to basically get a job, get their foot in the door, and basically they've been talking about their experiences trying to get into a tier one, going through the interview processes there. And as I asked the question, I said, so why tier one? And it was almost like the question stumped this person. He's like, well, what do you mean? What else is there? So, you know, he never considered the other tiers. So I think there's a lot of misperception out there about what tier one is. I think there's misperception about if I want to get to the pinnacle of my career, I have to work in tier one. And I think in some cases, some people don't even consider anything else. They just think that's it. I always joke and say to people, you know, that it's not like there's multiplex and then a man with a white van, a dog and a tool belt, and nothing in between. The bit in between is there's a lot in between. So I think I think we want to, through this podcast, we want to point out, my personal opinion is that tier one, the upper tier space, or the tier one space isn't superior to the rest of the industry. It is just different.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of break that down. So I think there's a couple of groups of people that might be listening to this with this question in mind. One group of people is the group we already mentioned, is the graduates, is the students that's knocking on the door trying to get in. And then I guess the question is, why are they most of them so focused on tier one? I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think number one is the universities. The universities is very biased towards the tier one space, and that's natural. I guess it's because of the alliances and the interactions they have with tier one. Obviously, they have. I think a lot of them have the pick of the bunch really when it comes to graduates. Yeah,
I'd say this the partnerships that they have in that tier one space, and they go and they have access to the sites and they do visits and they have speakers and all of that. Yeah, and they get the pick of the grads in return for that. Yeah,
I think the second reason is because tier one sites are most prominent, they're the most visible sites out there. And I think if you're a university student and you start to look for opportunities, you go to Google, you're looking for graduate programs. It's the first thing that pops up is the main university graduate programs. But I think the mid-tier space is getting better. I went to the RMIT Open Day last month and spent the morning there, and in partnership with one of our clients. But I think there was quite a lot of the smaller tier businesses represented there. But I think still that representation is on an open day. It's not as comprehensive as maybe some of the other representation. The tier one's got representation. So then we've also got, I guess, people that are already in the industry and have started their career that are typically working for a tier 3 builder. As an example, I worked with a project manager last year, really great project manager, done really well in his career within the first 7 years from coming out of university, and he was moving into state, and he ended up going for 4 interviews. 3 of them were with mid-tier builders, and 1 of them was at a tier 1. and he picked a tier 1 job. And he said, look, Phil, he said, it's just something, I might be making a mistake, but it's an itch that I have to go and scratch.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it for so long. I'm really curious about what it's going to be like. I feel I'm going into it with my eyes wide open. I've spoken to people in detail. They've been there. They've hated it. I've spoken to people that are still there and love it. So I've kind of think I've covered both sides of the good and the bad, and I'm sort of going in there with an educated mind, I guess. So he's, by all accounts, doing well. It's still early days, and he said, look, I may well come back to tier 1 and to tier 3, and I probably will eventually find myself back in the tier space, but I want to go and have that experience. That's probably the best way you can go about it. But I also find that's the exception rather than the rule, that sort of approach.
Oh, we get so many phone calls from people that have spent, 3 years in tier 3 that are like, oh, and now it's time for me to move to tier 1. That's what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of younger people in the beginning of their career, they have this perception that, I start with a smaller tier builder and then progressively go to bigger and bigger tiers until I eventually get to the biggest tier, and then I've kind of made it. Some people do it, but that's not how it works.
Yeah, it's not the expectation. It's not the goal. Yeah.
No, so some people, more often than not, people do it the other way around. Start at the bigger tier and then find themselves working with a smaller tier, and we'll actually kind of give some good examples like that. So more often, what I find when you start quizzing people, when someone says to you, if you pose the question, so what do you want to do? What are you looking to do with your career? And they just talk about tier 1, and you dig into the detail of it. I find more often than not, it's a perception of prestige that drives that desire or that goal. It's more about and just a vague perception of, well, what do you mean? It's the biggest, it's the best. If I want to reach the pinnacle, I got to go there. Yeah. So we want to try and give a balanced view in this podcast today. I've never worked for a tier 1 business myself. I'm obviously not. We run a recruitment company. We're not builders. So we're going to try and take some of the stories that we've gathered over the last 6 months by sort of looking at this topic and talking to people, and try and provide, just like we've done with the client side, is the grass greener. On the client side podcast, I guess the balanced view about the good, the positives, the negatives, and who it might be good for.
Yeah.
I think the point I'm trying to get across is, like I said before, it's not necessarily that tier 1 is superior or better than the rest. It's just different. So the question is then, well, why do you say it's just different? Why isn't it better? And I think for me, it's because it's such a big part of a person's life. It's not like buying a car and say which one is better than that one, or it's not, or just going on a holiday. Well, which one is better? It's just talking about 30 plus years of someone's career.
Absolutely.
And I don't think if you're looking at such a big part of someone's life over that period of time, you can just segment pieces off and go, well, it pays more, or the projects are bigger, or whatever it might be that you look at in isolation. Because of the magnitude of the decision, all those things are going to link into it, and through a person's career, 20 to 22 years old to 32 years old to 42 years old to 52 years old, life's going to look very different.
Oh, yeah. Goals change. How you like to work change. It can look quite different to you between those ages.
So working in tier 1 versus, let's say, working in a business working on $1 billion, $800 million job or $1 billion job, working in a company with a turnover of, say, 100 million. It's going to be quite different in terms of the people that you interact with every day. It's going to be quite different in what your Wednesday afternoon look like. Yeah. It's going to be quite different in terms of the stresses and pressures that you have to absorb and deal with. It's going to be different in terms of the work-life balance that you may or may not have, in terms of how many hours that you put in. It's going to, there might be differences in earning potential that we're going to cover. So there's a lot in it. So therefore, I think you can't just say one is better than the other. You have to look at it, the holistic picture of it. Yeah. and then make a decision that's right for that person, for an individual. Because I think in the individual person's values come into play. There's a lot in there. That's probably one of the big factors, is what is important to you as a person. What do you value most?
Yeah. What does success look like to you? Does success look like working on that $100 million project or $800 million project, or is it being at home in time to put your kids to bed, but still earning a good wage?
I think because of the length of time you're going to do it throughout your whole career, the goal for most people would be to have a happy and successful career. Happy as you can be. You're going to have good days, bad days, good years, bad years, but overall you want to do the best you can for your career. So let's start off by telling some stories, I guess. And because we are naturally biased towards, everyone's got a bias towards something, right? And because most of our work or all of our work with clients are in the mid-tier space, just like with the client side and builder side podcast, we as individuals are mere biased towards one side. Try and balance it out, and let's start off with some stories that you've spoken to people that have spoken very favourably about their experiences in the tier 1 space.
Yeah, and these are people that spoke in particular about their enjoyment of the projects in tier 1, and that is probably the biggest draw card for most people, is working on those big exciting projects. And so I spoke to a project coordinator that had worked her way up from some smaller tier 3 businesses into a tier 1 business working on a hospital project, and I thought it was a pretty interesting person to speak to for the podcast. And the project was the draw card. And she said to me, "Lauren, I absolutely love my job. I'm the type of person that likes to challenge myself." And so she said in tier 3, I found the projects were okay, but I wanted to do something harder. Every day I come to work and I find something new to learn, new ways to grow. So she likes the projects in tier 1 because they are challenging, but also the hospital itself was a big draw card for her. And she said, I'm going to look back at this project, when it's finished, and for the rest of my life I can say, I built a hospital that saves people's lives. And so for her, it's memorable. She feels like it's significant. She feels like it's a real contribution to society, the project that she made.
Look, I think one of the default questions I ask everyone when we start talking about when people are looking for a job or a career change or whatever, I often ask this question: how important are projects to you? Is the project size important to you? Is the project style important to you? And I find there's a real mixed bag about people that placing value in terms of their importance of value on projects. Some people will say, don't care. Yeah. Project's a project. Construction is construction, mate. And those people often say, what's more important to me are things like culture or work-life balance or money, God forbid, or whatever it is, right? But other people will be very specific. No, it has to be, I don't only want to work on big projects, or I only want to work in the high-end residential space, or, we're working with a candidate at the moment that only want to do fit-out because they love that fast-paced turnaround and they've already 5 years in, so not interested in it. I've got new build jobs for them that I don't want to hear about them, only fit-out.
How do you like to spend your day? That's important, to enjoy how you spend your day. She likes the challenge of complex work, and I respect that. So
I think if you place a high value on the project type, then yes, tier 1 should be a strong consideration. But I think what the counter argument I would make to that point that she made, as a more broader statement, is that complexity and challenge is not just found in the tier 1 space.
Yeah, look, that's
and I think
true.
it also depends on. We had another person that worked for, I think you're going to mention it in a moment, worked for micro companies, like really small companies that were very poorly set up, and then went to a tier 1 and went, I will never go back there again because they're so disorganized, and then have built this perception that the tier 3 space is all over the place and this is so much more professional. But if you look at the individual circumstance, that person never really worked for a properly set up tier 3 builder.
Yeah.
So their comparison is kind of a little bit out of whack in terms of what the industry as a whole is, because they haven't had that experience.
Very, very true.
So equally, I think when it comes to just wanting complexity and challenge, and I think, you know, we've got another story that demonstrates that really well.
Yeah, that's true. So yes, enjoying the projects for the complexity of the challenge is one thing. It doesn't mean complexity isn't found in mid-tier projects. And I think the enjoyment of the project in and of itself is important. I spoke to someone who had come from the upper tiers into mid-tier fit-out. And again, you know, I'm interested in how people find that change. She was loving the change. She'd been in between these two jobs. She'd been off travelling, come back, settled into her new role, and had gone to the pub with some mates from her old job, and they were having a drink, talking about what they were doing, and they were asking her, because, you know, she's the one that had made the change on what are you working on in this new space she was in. She said, I'm on a $33 million fit out. It's actually really interesting. And they're all going to take us for give their beer. Like, we're all on this $300 million project. You know, a bit of a chortle at the difference. She said, actually, my project is so interesting, I don't miss the $300 million projects I used to work on. She said, it's just as interesting as what you're doing.
I think it also really depends on what people's definition is of interesting or challenging, right? I think if you contrast a $30 million job with a $300 million job, there's going to be different things that feed into complexity and challenges. So, from a technical perspective, in terms of, let's say, looking at like services packages or the complexity that comes with working with live environments or sensitive environments, or having to deal with complicated or, you know, difficult stakeholders or whatever it might be. You can certainly find that complexity in the $30 million job as much as in the $30 million job. But there are going to be some complexities and challenges that perhaps will be more unique to the tier 1 space, dealing with unions, dealing with different levels of stakeholders across government, or depending on the level of role that you have as a project manager or wherever you might sit.
Well, this is the thing too. My CA has, you know, pretty good access to most of the project at her level, and her compatriots sitting around the table to her won't see any of that stuff. They won't see the union aspect. They won't see anything the PM does. And while they are working on a $300 million project, they're all working in silos on an element of it. You know, they might be project coordinators of structure. Maybe if they're lucky, they're hitting something more complex like services or something like that. But they're seeing a very small element of that project, and will continue to do so for quite a number of years. And there's also some, you know, small but very excited baby project coordinator on that project who's so excited to be on this huge thing, but actually finds out they're spending the next 6 months putting doors on. I mean, some people get really disappointed to realise that that's all they're looking after for 6 months too. Huge project, but doors is all they get to look at. Like,
it's interesting that story was actually mentioned by this person who was actually doing it, because it was one of the previous companies I worked in, and earlier in my career we used to talk about that there was a kind of a throwaway comment we used to make with people in terms of pointing out that contrast working as a junior CA or coordinator between a tier 1 and a tier 3, where we say, you know, in tier 1 you might be stuck with doing door handles for 6 months, mate. And then it was just like a comment, but in this case, this person was actually on looking at doors.
Yeah, someone has to do them. It's not necessarily very exciting, but someone is doing it.
So I think, sum that bit up, I think if we talk about complexity, and if someone has complexity as a high value in terms of what's important to them in their career, then you got to look at it from different angles. Well, what does complexity mean to you? And also then understand, if you're going into the tier 1 space, your interface with high levels of complexity in terms of decision making is going to take time for you to work into it before you really get exposed to the real complexity, whereby you're going to be in a position to leverage your own expertise, decision-making ability, and knowledge to have an impact on it. It's going to take a long time, because in the first however long, you might be stuck doing door handles.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. And I think it's interesting when we talk about the stories of young people in the two different spaces and how much exposure they get, especially when they're coming into a business. And we talk to people that do their first few years, sort of graduate years in the tier 3 space and graduate years in the tier 1 space, and they have quite different experiences. If I focus on young people in tier 1 to begin with, we know a lot of tier 1s have very structured graduate programs, and on the whole, a lot of people are very grateful for the experience that they had. They find it very full on, but very worthwhile. A lot of people that I spoke to, even the ones that had left the tier 1 space after that program and said, look, it was too much for me. I moved to tier 3 after that. I found it, quite exhausting. Did say it was very good, but some do move on. I had one young project coordinator that kind of got stuck in that space because it is so big. There are so many people on it. It can be difficult when you have a lot of tick boxes to kind of do. So you spend, you rotate through, estimating and project coordination and defects and all kinds of different things. I spoke to one young person who kind of got stuck on defects, couldn't finish because the project got stuck. He couldn't actually tick off that the project had finished all their defects. He got stuck in the defect section of his 2-year program for a year. So he couldn't actually finish his graduate program for an extra year than the rest of his cohort, and that held up his pay. It sort of held up his title change as well, and so he found that quite disappointing. I also, found some people that got put off about being project coordinators at all by the pace of tier 1 for young people, because the hours are quite long. He actually moved out of tier 1 altogether. And ended up becoming a site supervisor in the tier 3 space, because he was just like, project coordinators, so much pressure, piggy in the middle. And we did a whole episode on the pressures of project coordinators as well, and decided to move on site. And I am seeing a real trend of this kind of thing happening, but I'm certainly seeing a number of people making that shift because of the pressures of that particular kind of role, and just sort of taking themselves out of it, just want to work on site, want to get back to building, have a simpler kind of life.
Yeah, look, I think people have had quite different experiences with the tier 1s, as you would do with any builder, and it's maybe sometimes a bit of a luck of the draw. Like if you end up starting on a project that's still got a long time to go, like it might have another 2-3 years to go, and if you end up just through the resourcing structure of that project find yourself in that place where your value is not to the business and to that project is doing something that is perhaps more repetitive than you'd like it to be for your learning and development, like the person getting stuck on doors or this person getting stuck on defects. So it just is what it is. Yep. The business broadly might like to have rotated you through different parts, or had on a spreadsheet or as an idea of a roadmap of your career development pathway, a different idea in mind. But hey, that's what the project demands. You're getting paid to do a job. Keep quiet and get on with it, kind of thing. And some people can feel really frustrated by that. But then that's probably not the experience for everyone. We've also had people that have come out of it and said it's been a great, experience that made them quite well-rounded. So I think it depends on where you end up. I think the other point to make is that the mid-tier space has also got a lot of builders also have programs. It's not like you only find these programs in tier 1. It's I'd say on balance you'd probably say half or maybe even more than half of the mid-tier builders have got some form of structured graduate cadet program. Some of them will still rotate you through estimating and through different elements of the business to make you more well-rounded before you graduate and step into your first full-time role. They will still have modules and online content for you to consume. They'll still have structured ways of learning. Some are more rigid than others. Typically, the bigger the business, the more structured and rigid the program. The smaller the business, the more the more fluid it is. And we've had people. I think people are, like we said earlier, people are obviously often more biased towards their own experience. So you've had people that end up go from mid-tier to tier 1 and said, I'm so glad I had that experience with a tier 3 builder because I learned these 5 things that I wouldn't have learned here, and I now feel grateful that I had that experience because I'm all the better for it.
True.
And then we had people that come from tier 1 and end up going to tier 3 for various reasons to say, I'm so glad I've had that experience because I wouldn't have had it in there. So I think the point being, one isn't better than the other; it's different.
Yep.
In the terms of how you start to learn, but then it also probably feeds into learning styles. Like if some people just hate that sort of structured, boxed off learning, almost academic type of going about it. They prefer to just work with a really good project manager as a mentor and learn as you go and actually feel like they're contributing to things with things and being part of a close-knit team.
There is no one style of learning that works for everyone. And look, that is something to consider too if you are lucky enough to sort of have a choice about how to learn coming into the industry. The tier 3 builders that don't have graduate programs, if you go into one of those and you have a really good mentor, you can have an amazing experience. I know a young person who started with a tier 3 builder and was kind of a little bit miffed that there was no graduate program, would have liked something structured, bit of a go-getter, really wanted to soak it all in. But what he did have that worked out really well for him was a very, very motivated mentor who wanted to actively teach him, spent a lot of time with him, was very invested in him. And that turned out to be a really good relationship, so much so that when the mentor moved into the upper tier space and took a job in that space, he said to him, come with me, I have a job for you, let's continue this relationship. And so he moved with him, even though he never kind of imagined that he would make that move himself. So here he is now working in the upper tier space, and the last time I spoke to him, he said, do you know what I value most about my new role is I have access to all of these other people who have all of this experience and knowledge that I now have access to. And he says, I just go up to them and say, hi, this is who I am. I'd love to learn from you. Do you have 10 minutes? Can I buy you a cup of coffee and pick my brain? And he said, that's been the best learning experience ever, is all of these new people to learn from.
I think when it comes down to learning and development, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what matters most are great mentors. Like number one, you can have the best graduate program in the world, but if you don't have strong mentors, then it won't be as good as it can be. And equally, you can have no structured way of learning, but if you've got a great mentor, that's more important than the program. So I think as a graduate, as a cadet, when you're applying for jobs, probably don't have a choice in the matter because you won't know until you get there.
True.
But I think the important thing to point out, perhaps from a learning and development perspective, given that we're talking about the size is bigger, better, well, the mentor is probably more important than the size of the project or the company when it really comes down to it. Also, if we talk about how people learn, I think one of the earlier podcast episodes we did, I think it was the one about attitude. I think the title was why your attitude will make you fail in construction. One of the key takeaways that we put in that podcast is for people to be proactive in your learning, to be almost sometimes be a pest to your PM or the person that you report to, by asking questions, by putting your hand up for new experiences, by really pushing to learn and develop. I think if you're that way inclined, there's an argument to say you're going to perform better and maybe in a smaller tier environment with a great mentor and a bit more of a fluid learning style. Yeah. But if you're the type of person that's on the other end of the scale, that's hopefully not too far, because that's kind of detrimental to your learning, that kind of want things to be given to you, handed to you, and for you to be able to know what's coming next, so you can plot out your learning over the next 6 months. And now I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and everyone's going to tell me what I need to do when. If you that way inclined, then you're going to really struggle in the smaller tier environment.
Maybe,
because if everyone's busy and everyone's just getting their stuff done, you'll be sitting there going, what do I do now? But everyone's too busy, perhaps, in an extreme scenario. And we just took a reference from someone not long ago where the feedback of that reference was that person didn't have necessarily enough ambition. They didn't ask very many questions, and they had to be spoon-fed all the time. Now, look, I'll personally say that I think if you're that way inclined, you're going to struggle in construction as a whole.
Yep.
But you're probably going to perform better in that structured environment because you're going to be spoon-fed everything in a very structured way.
Yeah.
But if you're the person saying, what do I do next? Hey, I've noticed that task there.
Yeah.
I reckon I want to have a crack at that. Do you reckon I can have a go at it? And I'll go and do it. You show me how, I'll go and do it, and I'll come back and you sort of check if I've done it right. If that's you, then there's an argument that you might be more frustrated in a very large corporate tier 1 environment where you have to go what the book says you have to do at any given time. This is my opinion. Yeah,
it's interesting. It's an interesting take.
And I think that then feeds us into that whole sort of culture piece. I think, and that's kind of how businesses are set up and run, and what sort of feeling you get and how people operate in it.
It's interesting. We do find go-getters sometimes come out of that tier 1 space into the tier 3 space because they like to be seen. They like to have opportunities, and they like to kind of have the chance to distinguish themselves and have the opportunity to be recognised for leadership opportunities like that. I spoke to someone who'd come out of that tier 1 space into the tier 3 space, and I'll have to edit the language a little bit. One of the things he said to me is, look, there's just less BS here. I like to be able to get things done. There's less BS here. I feel like I have more contact with the leaders of the business, more of a chance to kind of shape things the way that I want it to be. But there's also, in the same time, there's less pressure. The stakes are less high in some ways, but there's also much deeper involvement and deeper learning. So I think that's quite interesting. We know people that want to run projects, run them themselves, be more deeply involved, that leave tier 1 to come and project manage in tier 3 for that personal level of satisfaction.
I think those people you're referring to also work for companies that were started by people that came out of the tier 1 space. And we've got a couple of clients that are running very successful mid-tier businesses of significant size that started in the tier 1 space. So I think it also makes the point that wherever you go, you don't need to commit for your entire career. You can transition in and out. There are some caveats here and there, but that's probably an episode for another time. But like when we were talking about the client side space versus the builder side space, there's kind of a one-way street there. Once you get past a certain point, being you can't struggle to go from the client side into the builder side. With the tiers, it's a little bit different. If you're a well-paid project manager running $10 million projects, you're not going to get a job running a $500 million job. That's of course obvious, but you can probably still transition in a different role. But I think a lot of people go and cut their teeth there and then go and have started successful businesses or have taken senior leadership in smaller businesses. And the language that they use and what they will tell you is normally they will talk about all the things that they didn't like in the upper tier space and remove them. And yes. I think it's just, I don't think it's through anyone's, it's not that the tier 1s are at fault of this. I think it's just a natural way of a bigger business. There has to be more bureaucracy. There have to be more systems. There have to be more, maybe systems is the wrong word.
Checks and balances.
Yeah, just more ways of doing things, more red tape.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, because of the scale and volume, things would fall apart.
Yeah.
And those things, the byproduct of those things often have a lot of negative negative consequences towards the individual employees, and just things they have to deal with. So when people transition out of that environment and go and work in a small environment, maybe a startup business, all that stuff just disappears. And there's maybe that honeymoon period where they feel like, I just got all this stuff done. It would have taken me 2 weeks to do it over there, and we've
Yeah.
just done this in half an hour, because you're sitting there with the director, decisions gets made, it gets signed off. All right, let's go. We've done it. Where
Yeah.
over there it would have been a whole sort of hoo-ah
So
to
many
try and
levels
get
to
it.
move through,
to get
yeah.
it done. So I think, when we're talking about making these decisions, is it better? Is it not better? It's probably a bit of self-reflection and that sort of soul-searching thing that we always talk about. What sort of person are you? Are you someone that just want to see, I'm here, I can see where the goal is, where I need to go in terms of whether it's your career or whether it's getting an outcome on a project. I know how to get it done, I'm going to get it done. Versus meandering through all of if you get frustrated by doing a whole lot of stuff that perhaps isn't necessary to the outcome of the goal, but it has to be done for the greater good of the business because that's the way it has to be done, then some people pull their hair out. And then when you then have that conversation with them, they say, oh, so good, it's just so much less BS here. That's what they mean, but that's just this is how it shakes out.
Yeah.
I think, the point being is people have come out of the bigger tier, started businesses and I think a lot of the graduate programs that have been implemented by these smaller builders as well have come from either business owners or senior leaders that worked in the tier 1 space and then have sort of taken the graduate program and sort of removed the bits that they thought didn't work as well or was unnecessary or was maybe a bit top heavy for what they needed, and cherry picked the best bits and sort of created something a bit more nimble and a bit more fluid, I guess, for their graduates that work in that smaller business. And when it comes down to that thing, I personally gravitate more towards that whole sort of, you could call it the Goldilocks effect, It's not too small, not too big, the bit in the middle, that's just right.
Yeah.
Good mentors, good systems, good procedures, projects where you can get your teeth stuck into and have a great learning experience. You're not in either of the extremes of the spectrum. To me personally, that kind of works. I think while we're on that topic about the size and the learning and development, I think there is a downside to perhaps going too small, going too micro.
Yeah.
I think we've seen people, there are businesses out there that are either very, very small in terms of their makeup and size of projects, and they're just micro. So often there's best practice goes out the window, and the way things are done are not the way they necessarily should be done particularly for a young person in their learning and development. Then there are also businesses that build projects of significant size, and then when you realize, when you understand how they structure teams, you're like, how do you guys build something of this size and scale with this amount of people, where it's run very, very lean. And then when you're a young person in that, you're really thrown into the deep end, and it's sink or it's swim. Now, there's positives and negatives to that. We see people that thrive in that environment. Again, if you're that person that's got number one, you got to have a thick skin.
Very thick skin.
You got to not be precious. You got to be. You've got a really strong work ethic.
Yeah.
You got to be smart, street smart maybe, in terms of thinking on your feet and thinking 10 steps ahead and figuring it out for yourself. People like that tend to thrive in that environment and get ahead very quickly.
They get promoted very quickly.
Yeah, because they deliver outcomes that is worth way more than what they're getting paid.
Costing.
They're typically getting paid little bits of money, but what they're delivering is sometimes twice the pay grade that they are on. Those people are great, but it also always comes with the downside to that is often that they learn bad practices in the eyes of maybe other builders. They're like, if you take that person, you put them there, they'll love that grit that people develop through that learning process, but they'll want to put the brakes on them and go, well, you can't do it that way and that way. All these things, we just need to tighten that up and change that, because that's flowing by your seat of your pants. You're sort of opening yourself up for a whole lot of risk here. Just calm that down, and that's often that transition period.
Makes it very difficult for that young person to move on. There's a whole conversation to be had around that. It's not a great situation for them.
But the people that aren't that way inclined, that have got a different way of learning and personality, they just get spat out very quickly. They'll be there for 3 weeks or 2 months, and they'll just exit because they hate life, and it's just too intense, or they will just fire them straight up.
Yeah.
So I think it's been aware of being in those environments that are potentially either too small or micro, where there's not a lot of people to learn from, and you just have to figure out by yourself. Either a good structured environment, or maybe the bit in the middle.
Yeah.
Where it's not where the porridge is just warm, not too hot, not too cold.
Yeah, that's right. And
and I think, moving on from that sort of hardcore environment where people are thrown in the deep end with very high task loading, that probably leads us on to the conversation that's, again, probably one of the most prominent conversations when we talk to tier one conversations, is work-life balance and the hours, the pressures and the stresses that you put in there.
Yes.
I think it's no secret that they work many more hours on average than the other tier space. I think you spoke to someone that transitioned, and they're saying they're working 2 hours a week, day extra.
This is my project coordinator with his, he's enjoying it. He's enjoying the mentors that he's chatting to and buying coffee for. And he's a motivated person, but he did mention his day is 2 hours longer, and he's happy because he's learning and he's motivated.
It's 10 hours a week extra.
10 hours a week extra. Yeah. And not everyone can do that.
Yeah.
And this is at the beginning of his career.
I remember a number of years ago, I placed a site manager out of a tier 1 into a tier 2, and he went from working on a $550 million job to a $150 million job, and he was quite happy to take a $60,000 pay cut for it because he hadn't seen his kids in 4 months. That's extreme examples there, but it shows that people... I think when it comes to work-life balance, it's one of these important things that fits into this whole bigger conversation about your life over the course of 20, 30 years. One of the first podcast episodes we did as relating to graduates and cadets, as we asked the question, should graduates have work-life balance? And the answer was no. So I think my generation and the older generation and the people that are in leadership roles in construction companies, most people will have the view that if you're coming in as a grad, you got to work. Yeah. You got to work and earn your stripes.
You do, yeah.
Don't talk to me about working from home or work-life balance until you get to a point. Now, the difference, in my opinion, and this might change, and I think some companies are trying to change it, and we kind of hear who they are, and some are just like, well, it is what it is. But if you're working in the mid-tier space and you get past your first, let's call it 3-5 years, and you work yourself into a position where you are competent at your job, you're delivering great outcomes, and you know your stuff.
You're adding value, yeah.
If you're working in a mid-tier or in a medium-sized company, or depending on what the dynamic of the setup is, you can typically find a place where you can have work-life balance in the context of, as it relates to construction, which is still quite intense, but you can have this life and deliver what you need to deliver, and your employer and everyone's happy, and it works, it's sustainable.
Yeah.
I find on balance that's harder to achieve in the tier 1 space.
Yes.
Like, you have to work really, really hard to get that promotion, to get that point, and then the work gets even worse. Yeah. Like, if you're a project manager, you work up to project director level over the course of however long, 10 years, and then you're running a $500 million job, and then your task loading is even higher. You're working, you've got more stress, more hours. So it's just like, it seems to just be like you just need to be one of those people that thrive on just working and high performance all the time.
I do hear from people that they say it's more competitive for those promotions in that tier 1 space, and if you want it, you've got to be working, you've got to be putting in. Everybody wants them because there's less of them, more competition, and at the same time, I also have young people telling me in the space that there are not many people over 30 in there, and when people hit that time of their lives where the kids arrive and life changes, they are floating back down into tier 3, where they can have good careers, still earn good money, have a really fulfilling time, and it's different. So I think in tier 3, that's where we are seeing that real effort to be made for work-life balance. The people we work with, we know businesses that are really moving heaven and earth to be an employer of choice, to attract people, to have, less Saturdays, better hours. In Tier 1, I think there are businesses that are making a nod towards it as best they can, despite the outcomes and the pressure and the margins that they must keep. But it's yeah.
Look, I think the mid-tier space have worked really hard particularly over the last decade, to create environments where great people want to go and work. People that are very talented in what they do want to go and work and wants to stay there. And I think a lot of the Tier 1s are doing that. I think some of the newer ones are doing that, but I think the older established companies, maybe there's an argument to say, and look, I might be wrong in speaking out of turn here, but I think they don't kind of have to. Like, the graduates are queuing around the block to get in there. Everyone wants to go in there because of the name and the brand and the perception.
Yeah.
So, and particularly in a market like we have now. So I think they probably still have challenges with hiring and retaining mid to senior level talent. That's always going to be difficult.
Yeah.
But they have a constant flow of graduates coming
young
in,
talent.
And some fall out, some stay. So when you mid-tier smaller businesses that are new to they've had to create something. It's like, had to ask themselves the question is, why would someone come and work here? Why would they stay working here? And therefore we see in work environments that are often really good working environments in terms of the culture, the vibe that you get from the place, however your whole experience is better than it's ever been in the mid-tier space in terms of their systems, the quality of the people, the quality of their processes that are often just as good or in line with Tier 1.
Yeah.
But also work-life balance, and pay as well.
Yeah.
I think just very quickly, I think in terms of we talk about the difference in pay, does Tier 1 pay more? Yes. I think if you take a graduate and you look at the first 5 years of their career, I think the pay gaps aren't that massive. When you get to the very senior levels, when you get above 200 grand, then people earn really, really big salaries and later in their career in Tier 1, 300 grand above. But I always say to people, when you look at this holistic viewpoint, anything over 190 grand, you give 45% away to the ATO, you're left with 55%, and then you have to ask yourself the question, what you're having to put in, is that worth it? Yeah. And if you're doing it for the money, it's a long old road.
Yeah.
If you're doing it because you love it and that's who you are, and you thrive on that high performance, stressed, pressured environment, then you do it whether you earn the money or not.
Exactly.
And I think, but also the point is being that there's those salaries and earning potential is available in the mid-tier space as well. People go set up their own businesses. People become construction managers, general managers, senior leadership positions that have got pay just as well. So I don't think you can just go and pick Tier 1 by just saying it pays more. For all of the things that we've discussed here. So you got to look at it through the holistic thing. So if we wrap it up and we say, is bigger better? Well, I think only the individual can answer that question. I don't think Tier 1s are objectively better than all the other tiers. I think it depends on the subjective view of the individual in terms of understanding what's important to that person.
What gets you up
in the morning? What makes you happy? What are the things that interest you most? And if all those things fit into the Tier 1 camp, then the answer is yes. The bigger is better, like with some of these people that we've mentioned. If you ask them, like, Tier 1 is me, I never work anywhere else. But if it's not, then the other tiers are definitely better. So
great careers to be had there.
Yeah. So thanks for listening.